So, gay men, meth, and sex, it's a thing. And you probably have heard a little bit or experienced maybe in your clinical practice, or maybe you're just interested personally. But that little trifecta is really, really insidious, albeit kind of a small percentage of people who are affected compared to the general population. But what I want to present to you is that even though it's a small percentage of the overall population, the gay meth epidemic represents a major unhealed wound in the collective psyche of the LGBT population at large. So to start, I want to do a short meditation with all of you. This is a great way to kind of just arrive in the room, not just physically, but mentally and spatially, to kind of relax and drop into your body, and I hope we can all do this together just for about 3 minutes. So if you're comfortable enough to uncross your legs and bring your feet flat on the floor, if you're willing to close your eyes, that's ideal. If not, just focus at a point on the floor without moving your gaze too much. And we're going to do a really excellent beginner's practice called the 4-count breath. And it's just what it sounds. It's breathing through the nose for the count of 4. So you're inhaling 1, 2, 3, 4, holding the breath 2, 3, 4, exhaling 2, 3, 4, holding the breath out 2, 3, 4. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4. Hold it out 2, 3, 4. And continue like this on your own just for a couple more minutes, concentrating on your breath. No matter how busy your mind might be, do your best to consolidate all of your awareness onto your breath, and just stay focused on the 4-count breath. Last little bit, stay focused on the breath. Now just relax your breath back into a normal rhythm, but keep your eyes closed for another moment, just noticing how you feel, observing if that brief meditation changed anything at all. Just kind of notice. And then as you feel ready, you can slowly open your eyes and bring your attention completely back into the room. Welcome back. So this 4-count breath is an excellent tool for yourself and really, really great for clients, especially those who don't have much experience with meditation. Breathing meditation is more effective than any other style of meditation, including mindfulness, for giving quick results. So if you're looking for results like reducing stress, reducing anxiety, improving sleep, improving secretions of beneficial neurotransmitters, breathing meditations are clinically proven to provide faster results. Clinically proven to be even more effective than mindfulness. So this is a really great one. It's actually taught in combat training because it's so effective. They teach it in the military to help people perform under much higher levels of stress than most of us go through. So I highly recommend that practice. Just to kind of give us a little background picture of this demographic that we're focusing on today. Just give you a minute to look this over. Most of you probably already know that LGBT people have a much higher rate of substance abuse, mental health disorders, suicide attempts, and all those types of things. 20 to 30%. Across the board, it's higher than heterosexuals. This is getting a little bit more specific. And then this is getting even a little bit more specific. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a small percentage of the population, but indicates a very, very important problem. Almost like a axis, or I feel like almost there's like a key in here. You know, the gay meth epidemic, which is considered by many to be kind of an invisible epidemic. There's a lot of insight that we can gain from it for ourselves and for the entire population. This is an example of one of the reasons of the stress, the anxiety, and the reasons why a lot of gay men use meth is because there's these constantly bombarded, unrealistic expectations of body and youth in gay media outlets. This is just kind of your common average gay, targeted towards gay men, of course, or bisexual, or anyone who's attracted to men. But in the man department, this is largely what you get. And this type of unrealistic expectation is what can contribute in part to the reason why a lot of gay men find meth to be such a perfect antidote to issues of chronic shame and guilt around their sexual orientation. Meth is the perfect solution with a very, very high cost that works to eradicate the guilt and the shame, at the same time giving you that trade-off of the Superman-like libido, right? So if you have body shame issues and internalized homophobia, to be able to simultaneously squash that away, not feel any of those uncomfortable emotions, and be handed this, steel libido with meth, this is the perfect storm for why it's become epidemic in the gay male population. And our little happy dopamine face here is the primary reason why. All drugs and illicit substances generate excess dopamine, and depending on the drug, may target more serotonin or oxytocin or endorphins, but there's no other substance known on Earth that releases as much dopamine as meth does. Don't ruin pizza, don't take meth. Because we get dopamine naturally through pleasurable activities, whether it's a beautiful sunrise or whether it's eating a nice meal. The brain releases about 50 units of dopamine for a really satisfying meal. And that's really enjoyable, right? Like, we all enjoy a deeply satisfying meal, not to mention sex, which is the highest release of dopamine that you can get naturally, 100 units of dopamine. You move over to cocaine, it starts to get a little higher, 350, and as you can see, nothing even comes close to the levels of dopamine that methamphetamine releases, which is about 1,200. So that's one of the real challenges in meth recovery, is that because the dopamine receptors have been so ravaged by the meth use, nothing is pleasurable. Nothing is enjoyable. Your favorite meal, normal sex, none of it gives you the pleasure that it used to. That's one of the reasons why it can be such a uphill battle with meth recovery, is because it's just grim. It's gray. There's no happiness. There's no pleasure. Your chemical that gives you pleasure, dopamine, has been exasperated. So some of the symptoms of meth overuse is methamphetamine psychosis, extreme paranoia, emotionally unstable, extreme fearfulness, lots of aggression, well-formed delusions, all this fun stuff. Basically psychosis, just pure unbridled psychosis. It's very disturbing. It's very sad. It can also, trigger additional mental health disorders that were previously latent. It can induce schizophrenia. It can induce long-term psychosis. The paranoia is probably one of the most well-known effects, right? You may have heard the stories of people who are putting tinfoil over their windows and their vents, and they're being monitored by the FBI, and they get highly, highly fearful of pretty much everything and live in a constant state of fear. It's one of the less seen but very tragic side effects, this psychosis, which oftentimes stays hidden, but when it comes out, it's so horrifying and so tragic and so sad, and oftentimes results in long-term psychiatric institutionalization. So from this to psychosis, it's a gradual but predictable trajectory that happens when there aren't the proper interventions. And it's a much different journey than in the more common depictions in the media of kind of the hillbilly with the lost teeth and the faces of meth, those kind of campaigns that have shown meth to be this ravager of the body and the mind. Gay men seem to have a pretty innovative way of maintaining their good looks for a much longer time, because the priority is sex and looking good. So for a while, they seem to be able to maintain their looks, which is another reason why it's sometimes called that invisible epidemic, because the physical characteristics aren't as obvious in that population. So the importance of culturally sensitive treatment, right? Therapists and rehabs. Specialized treatment was the only program treatment factor that was a statistically significant predictor of current abstinence.
Specialized, you mean for the meth addiction or for the population?
For both.
Right.
Yeah. So for both, because there's lots and lots of rehabs in the world, and in Los Angeles especially. There's a handful of LGBT rehabs, which I'll give referrals to later. But I've worked in a number of different rehabs, most just geared for the general population, and some that are specifically designed for the LGBT population. And if you have a gay meth and sex addict in a primarily straight rehab who's not talking about his sex issues, you have a guaranteed relapse. It's just every time. There needs to be culturally sensitive groups and people who understand the specificity of that addiction. It's guilt and shame compounded to an almost unfathomable level in a lot of them, because there's already guilt and shame around the sexual orientation in many cases, and the meth use extracts the most kind of unresolved, traumatic sexual fantasies out of their psyche. So starting out with guilt and shame around being gay, compounding it with the guilt and shame of these outrageous sexual scenarios that are based in unresolved trauma. It's like shame on top of guilt, on top of shame, on top of guilt. It's a really, really tricky and difficult thing to navigate. So it's imperative that they have a safe space and the proper interventions, right? So someone who's very comfortable with talking about sex, first of all, right? Like if someone's talking about fisting and Crisco and slings and bukkakis and like all this stuff that may be not your thing, but you can't have like a deer in the headlights face, you know. The things that gay men do on meth are what a lot of people would consider some of the most like horrifying sexual acts you could conceive of. And the more the addiction progresses, the more disturbing the sexual acts become. And disturbing not because it's inherently bad or anything morally wrong with it, disturbing because they're based in unresolved trauma, right? So sexual acts that are based in unresolved trauma and keep re-traumatizing and leave the person with really depressive and dark feelings afterwards, pretty harmful stuff. So the importance of specialized treatment. I mentioned in the beginning how I believe that the gay meth epidemic is indicative of a larger unhealed wound in the kind of collective psyche. So the shadow, Jung, of course, was the pioneer of that conversation or archetype in a psychological context. The shadow is that part of ourselves that we hate, that we wish would just die and go away. It's the disowned part of ourselves that we struggle with. And in this community, it's that part that is coinciding with the guilt and the shame. Guilt, shame, shadow. You can't get away without addressing the shadow in the treatment of gay meth and sex addiction. It's imperative. This is kind of just the symbol of that shadow. There becomes oftentimes with intravenous meth use like a fetish of the injecting. And what I've kind of come to realize is that the fetish of the actual injection is it's like a metaphor for being penetrated sexually. So there's this kind of primal need or desire to be penetrated by another man sexually, and it gets kind of compounded and distorted into this deeply destructive form of intravenous drug use. So that's something to be aware of and to know when it comes to working with this population, is that IV drug use is a deeply triggering thing, and even giving blood or going to the doctor can be a really triggering process for years after sobriety because of that reason. Again, something that's very, very shameful and hard for a lot of people to talk about, but it's real. It's a real thing. So again, I believe in the spiritual journey in general, but especially when you're dealing with such dark and disturbing topics like gay, meth, and sex addiction. You can't make progress simply by like love and light. You can't make progress by the law of attraction. You can't make progress in this realm through kind of feel-good, new agey one-liners, because it's dark, it's disturbing, it's triggering for most people, I would imagine, because it is so dark. And to kind of summon that bravery in yourself as a clinician or a therapist And to do that shadow work with yourself is a vital part of working with anyone who's in, you probably all know, if you're a clinician, you know that you have to kind of engage in that work yourself. And you may have already, if you're drawn towards this type of work, it's an ongoing process that doesn't ever really stop, I don't think. I think as long as you're alive, you're wrestling with your shadow. And the only way that it wins is if you consider it a done deal, right? So by making the darkness conscious, by bringing those things into light through meditation, through therapy, through journaling, through group therapy, through some of these practices that I'm going to describe a little bit more. I just like these pictures. I don't really know, it's just like more of a nice, diverse group of pictures of gay men together. I just like it, so I put them on there. I don't really know what to say about them other than they're great. So in terms of reintroducing sex for the gay meth addict in recovery, these are the three phases. From my experience, you can't really bypass any of them. It doesn't work. It just leads to relapse if you do, for the most part, in my experience. So first of all, total abstinence. To some gay meth addicts in recovery, it'll be initially met with resistance, but it may actually come as a relief because they've been having so much sex that they're actually like, okay, I can rest for 5 minutes. So it's like no sex for an undetermined amount of time. I didn't put a timeline up here because it will differ from client to client, from person to person. The bare minimum should be 30 days for each, but it should ideally be much longer than that. The traditional recommendation from AA or NA or CMA would be how long? A year, right? Tell that to most gay meth and sex addicts, and they will laugh in your face. That's not going to happen. Not going to happen for most of them. So it's important to meet people where they're at, right? And try to find a compromise. They may not be willing to even consider the idea of being abstinent for a year. Obviously, you can't force them, but you may be able to encourage, to use techniques like motivational interviewing, to try to seek out, well, what have been the consequences of this, right? Like, here are the consequences of your sexual behaviors. Maybe let's compromise. Would you be willing to be abstinent for 60 days? I find that most men in that situation are willing to give 30, 60, maybe even 90 days a shot. So after that, and that would be with no masturbation, no porn, no sex with others. Sometimes they may not follow it completely, but that would be the ideal, is no sexual activity whatsoever. And the reason for that is to give those neural pathways a little time to recede, right? Like those pathways in the brain that have been emblazoned with that intensity of the meth and the sex fusion, they need a little time to die down to even have any hope to go to the next phase, right? If you try to go from 1 to 3 or just skipping 1, the brain just doesn't work like that. Yeah.
You mentioned that it begins with the gay meth addict in recovery. So they're off of meth at this point?
Right, yeah. So at this point, this would be in sobriety. This could be right out of rehab. So as long as they have some sobriety, even if it's weeks or a month, they could start this. But it would be impossible to start this if you were still actively using. So then number 2, mindful masturbation. Still ideally with no porn. Otherwise, pictures, not videos. The reason for that is just that videos are so stimulating and they reactivate that kind of intense dopamine-seeking behavior. The next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Then they may end up spending hours finding, the perfect video to get off on. Ideally, there's nothing. It's just you and your body and your sensations. But if there's something, good old-fashioned magazine or still picture, Tumblr, something like no videos. Long deep breathing, relaxation, really practicing somatic awareness, coming into the body. The real healing journey here is in the body, and it's in the slowing down. I'll talk more about that later, but it's in reacclimating to sensation. Instead of this hyper overstimulation, it's dialing it down and learning to be okay with that, which will...
So it would also be with or without orgasm, because I can imagine that
with or
they
with...
do mindful
Yeah.
masturbation that they might not be able to.
Exactly, with or without, yeah. And ideally, learning that it's okay not to orgasm and not to ejaculate. That it doesn't have to necessarily happen at the same time. That's just a thing that most men are conditioned to, especially if their sexual education has been from porn, right? Which is the case for most men nowadays, is they learn what they learned about sex just from watching porn. So from porn, always it's the cum shot at the end. That's always, that's just how it goes. But that's not how it needs to necessarily be. There's a lot available, and a lot more energy available, and a lot of additional sensation available if you don't necessarily equate orgasm or ejaculation with self-pleasure. That alone is like, for most men, they're like, is that even possible? I never knew. But it is. So number 3 would be conscious coupling. It's the gradual process of dating, meeting other men without the use of any sex apps. So just like the videos during masturbation are going to start activating those neural pathways that we're trying to kill, so will Grindr. It's the same thing. It's the same method. It's pleasure seeking. I need my dopamine hit. I'm just a rat in a labyrinth looking for that dopamine hit, And all these things, whether it's the porn or the Grindr, they're all, or most social media is specifically designed to turn us into these lab rats that are just seeking our next dopamine hit, So no apps, like no apps. That's from my perspective, that's a non-negotiable. There's no benefit to any sex apps under any conditions. The ideal thing is going to be moving towards the old-fashioned in-person. I mean, I know it's horrifying thought to even consider that you might meet someone in real life, but I really recommend trying it. And I don't think there's really a lot of other options for this population in recovery. You can't use apps. What's left, right? I mean, yeah, I guess you could go on like OkCupid or Match.com, but I recommend taking the plunge and trying to re-engage yourself in real life, not electronic life of porn and apps, which is kind of the way of meth and sex addiction. It's just this technological immersion and a complete detachment from real organic life. So finding healthy social, recreational activities, there's a million things out there, a million things that you could do. Meetup groups, continuing education, sports groups, like there's so many things, especially in a big city like LA. Get out there.
Bar in there?
What?
About they just go to the gay bar?
Not a gay bar. If it's someone who's in recovery from meth, not a gay bar. Yeah, because the alcohol and the party vibe is going to be triggering. Even if alcohol wasn't their drug of choice, being in that environment is dangerous. And that's a slippery slope, because a lot of perhaps new meth addicts in recovery will say just that. They'll say, oh, well, alcohol wasn't my thing, right? I was just a meth addict, so I can go to the Abbey and have a few drinks and it's fine. But then guess what happens? The drinking lowers your inhibitions, and then 95% of the time, within a week, they're going to be puffing that meth pipe. So it just leads to the next thing usually in a matter of time. So ideally, it's the in-person recreational activities. It's getting out there in nature. It's, being a little bit uncomfortable, introducing yourself in groups, joining new groups, going on meetup.com and seeing what other dog lovers or film buffs or pottery enthusiasts are out there in Los Angeles, and joining some of those groups. When the point comes of where you're going to be looking at sex, then you start to do some of these mindful masturbation practices together, as well as adding more tantric practices slowly as desired. More fun pictures that I just like, because they're cute, right? So things like this are examples of authentic intimacy building, right? With meth and porn and sex addiction, it's looking for intimacy in a synthetic way that is guaranteed to never bring satisfaction. Guaranteed. Promise. There will never be a sense of satisfaction. What the desire really is for genuine intimacy with another man. All these are not necessarily sexual by nature, but they're intimacy building in a way that you're relating to, like even this. This is a fun, little exercise, doing things like that at the gym even. Fully closed, connecting through the sixth chakra, your third eye. That's a beautiful moment that's captured there. And of course, even more kind of physically nurturing and stimulating things that involve the whole body, such as bathing or massage, is going to be really, really great to help kind of bring the body back into the picture, as opposed to just simply the genitals. And that's where the person will start to find more satisfaction. So this is the nervous system. The nervous system gets ravaged with meth use, and the person is constantly in the fight or flight mode of the sympathetic nervous system. That's one of the reasons why the paranoia is so intense, is because they're always being chased, they're always being watched, they're always being monitored or surveilled by some federal body. Helicopters are always outside their apartment. The sympathetic nervous system is just getting amplified to a unreasonable crescendo. The things like this help to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest. It's the relaxing, mellow, sleepy, cozy, feeling good, like how all of your faces looked after the meditation. You looked kind of sleepy and you're kind of relaxed. Feels really nice, right? It's kind of where your battery feels like it's getting recharged. There's a nurturing quality to it. That's the sympathetic nervous system that you can start to reactivate with some of these things and the tantric practices. We want to reintroduce those things to help the nervous system heal after the effects of meth. It's kind of fun, right? All right, I think now we can start talking a little bit more about some of the actual techniques and the methods. So I told you about the 3 phases of introducing sex to the gay meth addict, and it's vital to follow them. And starting with the abstinence, moving on to the mindful masturbation, it's really important to understand that a meth addict has the attention span of a flea with ADHD. Essentially, I mean, if you think the social media addicted millennials are bad, like someone with a meth addiction is way worse, because it just erodes your ability to concentrate, and the way that it works in the brain with the dopamine and the nervous system, it makes focus almost impossible. So it's really important to know that this will be any type of meditation, tantric practices will be a real uphill climb for a meth addict in recovery, simply because their ability to focus has been all but destroyed. So anything that requires slowing down is going to be very difficult, almost painful for them. It's something that will require very gradual and nurturing type of encouragement. Because the thing that you really want to avoid in working with this population and bringing these tools in is layering more guilt and shame onto the already massive amount that they have going on, right? Like there's already just an unbelievable amount of guilt and shame in there that they're trying to address in treatment or therapy. And then if they start feeling guilty for not being able to meditate for 20 minutes a day, or not being able to masturbate for 20 minutes or whatever it might be, it's just the shadow sneaking its way back in there. You know, that slippery little shadow is finding its way back in and sabotaging the very techniques that are meant to eradicate it. Does that make sense? Kind of? So it's vital to remember that slow, gradual, steady, nurturing, validating, affirming, it's really the only way to go when you're looking at this kind of recovery. Let me back up a little bit. So I started to talk a little bit about the mindful masturbation, and some of the key points that you could consider, in addition to the no porn, is to really make it a ritual, make it a process, give it some time, turn off the phone, turn off the computer, don't do it before you have to go to a meeting or go to the gym. Make it something that is part of your day, you know. And you could really recommend. I'm going to give. There's more resources and books of things that will explain these techniques in more depth in a handout. But really making it kind of like a meditation practice. If you've ever practiced meditation, you may know that it's a great thing to do every day. You could almost think of healing your sexuality as a meditation practice. It's very similar, actually, and that kind of, you know, makes meditation more fun, right? So setting aside time to do that, you know, really, really giving it time, really, you know, as cheesy as it sounds, really kind of making a date with yourself, paying attention to the whole body, doing things like a nice hot bath beforehand, or a little body massage with some oil, doing a long, deep breathing to kind of get into that sympathetic nervous system is going to give the person a deeper experience of their sensations. I think I'm going to skip the polarity because that's just a whole nother... Oh, here we go. That's what everyone's been waiting for. So one thing that the most sexy slide of the whole afternoon. So one of the big things in terms of this demographic is anal sex, right? Butt sex, such a loaded taboo topic. A lot of people are really squirmish about it. But when you're talking about gay men, you kind of have to be okay with it. Anal sex is what we do. So a lot of gay men who are in recovery from meth have a lot of shame and guilt around not just the sex and the meth, but the specifically anal things that they may have done when they were high. This is pretty common, where they started out unable to be receptive anal partner. In their meth abuse, they were just like a voracious, you know, get the whole football team in there kind of thing. Just this kind of sexual Superman of anal sex. Then in sobriety, that all closes up again because they haven't addressed the core psycho-spiritual issues that are trapped in their butthole, of which there are. It's that first chakra. You know, if you know anything about the chakras, the energy systems in the body, that's our connection to the earth. That's our most primal, grounded center that is connected to survival, to just being okay in the world. A lot of primal core stuff is in the butthole. And if you haven't addressed some of the psychological stuff there, you know, of course, this is where more somatic stuff comes in, you won't be able to have anal sex in sobriety, even though they may really want to. They may recall having this amazing sex while they were high. They just can't have anal sex when they're sober. It's very, very common, and a big cause of distress among a lot of recovering gay men. So the old prostate massage here is a gentle and easy way to kind of reintroduce that process. The prostate is an amazing thing that all men are given, unless of course they've had it removed for whatever reason. But whether you're straight or gay or anywhere in between, the prostate gland is an amazing source of enhanced orgasm, pleasure. It's got a lot of medical and health benefits to just being massaged, A lot of people have so much stigma around it for so many reasons. They never give it a chance. And even, again, completely separate from any sexual pleasure, there's immense medical benefits to prostate massage. It can definitely help to reduce chances of getting prostate cancer. There's just a few of the dozens of other benefits from prostate massage. And in this specific context, it's a doorway to helping the client. Obviously, you're not going to be giving the prostate massage to them. They can do it to themselves. There's tools out there. There's one called the Aneros, which is specifically designed for that. It's a great partner exercise for people who are dating. But having prostate massage introduced into their body and psyche is a way of gently affirming that that's an okay thing to do, and you don't have to be high out of your mind on meth in order to do it. It's actually a healthy and safe practice that can lead to, more actually fully penetrative sex if that's what the person wants. I just like this one. Isn't it cool? It's another one. I just like it. It's cool.
It's so interesting what you're talking about. Not the prostate part, but it's so similar to. I work with a lot of sexual abuse survivors that are also addicts and alcoholics and sober, and it's a very similar process with the sexuality. They've been out there super active, and they get sober and can't have sex, and get triggered and all of this. So it's a very similar process. The healing.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, right. But with women, they don't have the prostate, but there's a very thin wall there between the rectum and the vagina, so there's a lot of nerves, and it's still, it's sexy in a different way. Yeah, it's just a little bit different, but it's still there. But thanks for bringing that up about the triggering, because that's another important thing when it comes to practicing any type of these things that I've mentioned, is that especially when there's a lot of psychological baggage that's getting gradually unpacked, triggering upset during meditation or even self-pleasuring or sex is to be expected. It's not going to be this, rainbows and unicorns kind of sexual Shangri-La. There's going to be stuff that comes up during sex that is difficult and unpleasant and triggering. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
Other than for the person it's happening to in that moment.
But it's still a good,
Picture.
yeah, exactly. In the big picture, it's unpleasant in the moment, but the alternative is that it just stays locked in the subconscious and just keeps showing up in these more insidious ways. So even though it's unpleasant to come out, it's still a really great thing, especially when they can address it in other ways, like with their therapist, with journaling, with meditation and prayer and social support, stuff like that. So there's the possibility of this kind of new same-sex paradigm. I like this one too. There's this artist who kind of reimagined some of these more diverse same-sex scenarios throughout history. This was a Buddhist monk. So with these type of practices that start to work on healing some of the unresolved trauma and the wounding, and can introduce a spiritual experience where sex can become connected to spirituality with the client. They have the opportunity to start to feel that not only is their sexual orientation okay and doesn't need to be shameful or guilty, not only is it okay, but it's actually amazing. It's actually very special and unique, and can contain in it this archetype of almost shamanistic, magical, archetypal wonderment, of this unique way that a same-gender couple can hold the polarities of masculine and feminine different than an opposite-gender couple. In a lot of indigenous cultures, there weren't just two genders recognized. There were, in some, up to a dozen different genders that they recognized based on a person's sexual orientation and their preferred way of presenting themselves in the world. Same-sex couples weren't just accepted or allowed to exist in society, they were actually revered. They were actually given the ability to control the tribe's resources. And they were looked upon in many ways as being naturally spiritually adept because of the way that they hold the masculine and feminine in a unique way. So when a person in recovery starts to just get a glimpse of some of these healing processes, not only are they okay, they're more than okay. That can be a possibility. That can be a perspective that they may start to feel or be awakened to, which is immensely healing. I just like him too. I don't know. I feel like I'm going to start wrapping it up, and we'll open it for some questions. So kind of in conclusion, we talked about some of the ways that meth works. We talked about the dopamine mechanisms and how meth affects the body and how it's this specific, just more happy guys. So gay meth addiction is this invisible epidemic representing an unresolved wound in the collective psyche of the gay community at large. I feel like that's a really important piece. It's kind of the macrocosm of the whole thing. Meth releases more dopamine than any other known substance. It's highly addictive and offers a high-priced, temporary gateway into uninhibited sexual freedom, overriding fear of intimacy, body shame, and internalized homophobia. Gay meth addiction demands culturally sensitive and specific treatment with a therapist or counselor who has worked on their own sexual issues, which is different than just going to school and getting a PhD in sexology. My best friend is a sexologist, and it's, learning about sex in school is not like learning about accounting or statistics in school. Sexual healing is something that you kind of have to do yourself, like talking about it from an academic perspective, I think only goes so far because it's such a intimate and personal thing. Reintroducing sex requires 3 distinct phases: abstinence, mindful masturbation, and conscious coupling. Tantric practices such as daily meditation and mindful masturbation offer a way to specifically address core wounding of the gay meth sex addict. Partner practices such as eye gazing, synchronized breathing, and prostate massage help build or rebuild authentic intimacy during dating or relationship. Here's a few referrals for addiction treatment centers, LGBT-based in LA. Those are also on there's a handout in there that has these things. That's me. So since we still have a little bit more time, I think I want to do a brief partner exercise. Since I didn't talk as much about some of the tantric exercises for 2 people, I want to do just a couple minutes of eye gazing with a brave volunteer. Who's gonna do it? All right, so come on up, Anthony. So come kind of more square to me. So one of the things that is missing in that search for intimacy is the ability to actually connect with another person in a real way. And with a lot of people in general, but especially if they're in recovery, it's almost impossible to make eye contact for any genuine period of time. Of course, in real life, when you're at the grocery store, it doesn't mean you have to be like staring people down in this kind of psychotic way, which, you know, is another thing that some guys do, is they kind of bore holes through your face, right, with their eyes. But when you're dating or you're starting to build up intimacy with someone else, to practice, this is actually a practice. And it even has some interesting studies that show it releases a lot of neurotransmitters and feel-good chemicals in your brain, is a meditative eye gazing. It's as simple as it sounds. You're really just looking in the other person's eye to left eye, so you're not darting back and forth. And this is a really nice way to kind of precede sex, or even just to connect. So I'd like for everyone, we'll just do it for a couple minutes. I know it seems kind of weird and possibly awkward to watch, but we're okay with it, right? Yeah, yeah. Huh? It's already being videoed. So just you can just watch us and just notice how you feel. Watching us just simply look into each other's eyes without trying to do anything, just being with each other, right? Like that's what eye gazing is about, is not trying to do anything, simply just be with each other and just kind of rest with each other. Can feel kind of awkward, kind of scary, feels really pretty vulnerable. Mm-hmm. But that's what intimacy is about, is being okay with being a little bit vulnerable. Thank you, Anthony. Want to do one more?
5 more minutes?
Sure.
Let's do one more. I think we have room. Okay, this is the kind of fun bonus one. So let me take the chair. This is a great tool for anyone who's in a relationship, and if you have a client who is physically agile enough to get into a yoga pose, this is a great one to show them. So I know you're like, you asked me if you're gonna.
Yes, I did.
I know. So downward dog. Most people know downward dog. It's the most common yoga pose. So it's this.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're just making a triangle out of your body, and so say you're having an argument with your partner. Fuck you, I hate you, this sucks, blah, 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 escalating. This is a great tool to use right in that moment where things are heated. You just come, okay, honey, let's just take 5 minutes, take 1 minute break, and let's just do that weird pose that weirdo at CHS told me about, okay? So turn around, so give yourself a little room, come heel to heel, and then go ahead and come down into the pose. So come on your hands and knees.
Like this?
Yep, so with your hands on the ground. Yep. And then I come into it too, and then we look at each other through the legs. And you hold that for 1 to 3 minutes, which we won't do today, and so you see the other person from an entirely different perspective, literally. Thank you, Anthony. All right, so I'll open it to questions if anyone has any other questions.
You didn't mention how long the eye gaze.
Kind of depends on what they're able to do. 1 to 3 minutes is a good, yeah. You could do it for longer, but 1 to 3 is a good place to start.
So start with 1.
Yeah, start with 1. Yeah. Yeah.
Great presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah.
How do you address the use of alcohol or other drugs during all the phases of recovery?
It really depends on the person, and it depends on what they're willing to do. Personally, I recommend abstinence if a person is looking to, if they're at a point where they're seeking treatment or they're entering rehab or they feel they are genuinely an addict. I recommend abstinence from all mind-altering substances. Otherwise, it's a really, kind of like I mentioned earlier, it's a slippery slope. Even your non-drug of choice can lead you back to your drug of choice, and usually does. If the person's not an addict and they seem to manage it fine, then that's fine. But if they are an addict, then usually best to be abstinent.
I know you mainly talked about crystal meth and sex being intertwined, but also I know as a party drug, GHB is usually often involved. Does that need to be addressed too?
Yeah.
Because it totally makes you feel a completely different way.
Yeah. It depends on the person. It's definitely one of the biggest like polysubstance combinations, meth with GHB. GHB is a downer, it's a depressant, it's similar to alcohol, but it's much more dangerous because it's so much more potent. And it's a clear, invisible liquid that can put you in a coma or cause blindness if you accidentally drink too much. And it's actually, that's more of the fatal overdoses come because of combining the GHB with meth. So yeah, it just depends on the person. If they're using GHB, then yeah, it definitely needs to be addressed and abstained from.
Why is that chosen in this population versus just opioids and crystal?
Because opioids kind of tamper down your sex drive, whereas GHB doesn't. It actually enhances it. Yeah.
So you then have a triple kind of addiction going.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's like liquid ecstasy, so it makes you feel like more connected to that
Oh,
other
you have
person.
the
Yeah.
okay, I got it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That explains it.
Yeah.
I had a question about the neurology involved and
Uh-huh.
all that dopamine being released.
Uh-huh.
Is it that the brain is actually building more neural pathways for the dopamine or deeper trenches?
It's blocking the reuptake of it. So
Because you talked about letting the pathways recede.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what you meant by, are we letting the pathways atrophy so that now we don't have these pathways demanding dopamine that we
Yeah.
can't get?
Yeah.
Well, how does that, what's actually going on? I'm always fascinated by
Yeah.
neurology of these
That's a great
things.
question.
So what's actually going on?
It's kind of two different things. So the dopamine receptors are being blocked from reuptaking the dopamine. So the dopamine's kind of
Stays.
bouncing. It's staying and bouncing around for long periods of time to create the high. So the dopamine receptors and their ability to reuptake the dopamine is what's getting affected in that part of the brain. And then when I was talking about the neural pathways, that's a different thing. Because the neural pathways are like those little patterns and grooves in the brain that become more deep the more we do anything, right? So when we drive the same way to work, that neural pathway becomes more ingrained. When we have sex a certain kind of way, that neural pathway becomes more ingrained. And then when you stop doing that activity, it starts to recede or grow over, if you were to kind of think about it as like a path cut through a forest. The more you travel that path, the more it will be
It's
open.
more deeper and deeper. So
Yeah.
then the pathways sort of disappear or
Yeah,
they're not so deep
exactly.
anymore.
Doesn't become
So if you have all these big deep trenches, is that why when you have you taking the meth that everything's gray because
No,
these
because-
pathways are demanding something that you can't fulfill?
Yes and no, because that's part of it. Is because almost the euphoric recall and the memory of those experiences are entrenched in those neural pathways. So that's kind of like the psychological, the grass is always greener kind of thing. But the dopamine and the reward pathway in the brain, that's kind of a different thing. That's pure chemistry.
And also because with the crystal meth, it floods the brain with dopamine, so the dopamine receptors stop functioning, and now you're not flooding it, you're not even getting normal dopamine production. So you get off the drug, you're not having normal dopamine production.
So your
For a
own ability to
long time.
produce it has been suppressed because you've been
Damaged.
artificially providing it
Yes,
to yourself?
Exactly, so that's
That's
why
part of
you
it.
feel like
Okay.
shit
Exactly,
6
yeah.
months later even.
And you're used to this super intense experience that you can't replicate anymore
Exactly.
with normal intimacy or sex.
Yep. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I've never worked with drugs. I've just been trying to learn about it on my own
Mhm.
with neurology and
Yeah, it's
this
interesting.
sort of thing.
It's interesting.
A lot of
Yeah.
what you said today, I've learned in other relationship classes that totally applies to just human beings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trying to relate to each other and form that emotional connection
Yeah.
rather than seeking something that's not satisfying. It's just focusing on generalism that's temporary,
Right.
but you don't have a satisfying relationship with someone.
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying is there's a lot, cuts across
It does. Yeah.
a lot of areas.
Yeah. Good. Good. I'm glad to hear that because I was hoping that it would be,
Yeah.
a little more universal than just for gay men. So I'm glad that you felt like that. Yeah. Good. Well, I think we're about out of time. So thanks so much for coming, everyone.
Brent.